So I just finished Return of the Crimson Guard by Ian C. Esslemont. This was a big one. I had read it before. This was a reread. I read it many years ago. I read all the Malazan books in publication order. But I haven't reread these ones. So this has been my reread. I just read Knight of Knives. Now I read this one, and I don't remember them being so long. Like, this is a huge book. This is 850-page book. Like, I thought of the 10 very big books as being very big books, but um, Esslemont's books are also massive. They're all 800 to 900 pages, aside from A Knight of Knives. So I wasn't anticipating that, so it took me some time to get through, and there's a lot in it. A lot. The last 200 pages encompass the two major battles at the end of this whole thing. Like, there's just so much in this book. And the first time I read it, I remember I really liked it. I thought it was really cool. We see lots of the old guard and that sort of stuff, and I really enjoyed that. But I've heard sort of, where you hear things that people think this isn't really well written. Same with Knight of Knives, and they think it's not until Stonewielder that Esslemont sort of comes into his own and writes well. I don't really pick up on that. There's a few times in here where there were things where I was like, "Ooh, I don't really like that." But maybe I'm just not intelligent enough to pick up on good versus bad writing. To me, I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed it's a like major part of the Malazan world. Major sort of events occur. Major characters are introduced and killed off, and yeah. So I have notes of just like the 8 different story threads that then all come together in the end. As with I think just about any Malazan book, they're what is the word? Not conjunction, not combination. Oh my word, I can't think of the word. You know what I mean? Where powers coalesce. I think it starts with a C, whatever the word is. Anyway, so the prologue mentions Osirk. So this book's not a lot about Osirk, but Osric, whatever his name is actually in this book. And I thought it was interesting because he's described as having tusks, which immediately makes me think Jagut. But of course, he's Tysliosan. He's not Jagut. But I wonder why he's presented or explained as having tusks. Like, that's one like thing that the author really points to, is that he is a tusked figure. Do the Tyst have tusks? Has he just sort of adopted them because he likes them? Or am I just reading way too much into this? Anyway, so our main character is Kyle. So this is good old Kyle is introduced, and I know everyone thinks that's just ridiculous. The character's name is Kyle in a fantasy novel. But that doesn't bother me that much. I mean, look at the names of the Marines and the names of all kinds of different characters. Like, his name's Kyle, so what? Just, go with it. It might be weird if you know someone named Kyle, I guess. But so we have Kyle and the Crimson Guard. So Kyle's joined the Crimson Guard. He's a recruit from Bale, south of the Sale. Along with him are these 3 guys, Coots, Badlands, and Stalker, who are 3 brothers, but aren't really brothers, who are from a sale. They were also recruited at the same time, and he's sort of our main POV, even though there's 8 different POVs at least, because he's the character who's new to the world and doesn't really understand everything. So we're introduced to things through his eyes. The very first mission the guard has with him is they assault this warlock. The warlock was powerful by drawing its power from a sleeping ascendant. That ascendant then awakes once they kill the warlock, and then the ascendant is killed, or they attack the ascendant, who is Osric or Osirk, who then transforms himself and puts himself into Kyle's blade. So Kyle's sword has a magical sword imbued with the power of wind, and it literally embodies Osirk. Osirk being the Tysliosan, son of Father Light, but also he seems to be a wind guy. Like, he's always in contrast to Anomander Rake as like darkness versus light. Mother Dark, Sun, Father Light, Sun. But Ozark's, I mean, his name's Cirque. It's got Cirque in it. He's one of the rulers of the Warren of Cirque, which is interesting. So he's light aspected and wind aspected. Anyways, enough about Ozark. So Kyle and the Crimson Guard, they're doing things, and then Kyle oversees Skinner and Cowell killing Stoop, one of the avowed brethren, like high up in the Crimson Guard, and because of this, Kyle has to flee. They try and kill him, but Kyle and those three brothers, the three Lost brothers, I don't know why they're called Lost, like capital L Lost brothers. Maybe that's their last name, or maybe it has a different meaning. They flee into exile, and they leave the Crimson Guard. And so this whole throughout this whole book, we have the Crimson Guard. It's called Return of the Crimson Guard. They're returning to Quantali to fulfill their vow. Much like the Talanamas, the Crimson Guard made a vow when the Malazans conquered Quantali, saying, we will return to this land and reconquer it and free it from the Malazan yoke. And this vow was so powerful, like the Talanamas ritual, the ritual of Talan. It sort of made them borderline ascendant. They're near immortal. They can't die, whatever. Those are the avowed of the Crimson Guard. So this whole book is them returning to Quantali to take it back over and free it from Malazan rule. But there is Skinner and Cowell, who are sort of the bad guys of the Crimson Guard, who are using the Crimson Guard for their own ends and are using it to gain worldly powers, and they want to sort of rule over the Empire, sort of Kellen Vidden Dancer style. And it turns out that Skinner and Cowell actually imprisoned Kaz Devore, the Duke, the Prince of the Crimson Guard, the leader, the one who's been missing for so long. He's been missing because Skinner and Cowell entombed him. But it turns out that Kyle and the Lost Brothers team up with the mysterious Traveler and this Thela Kai Urko, or sorry, not Urko, Eriko. They don't team up with Urko. Well, later, maybe. So Traveler and Eriko had been prisoners on the Corellery storm wall, but Eriko, through I think the Queen of Dreams, realizes that, oh, this Traveler guy, he's part of my destiny or whatever, I have to free him. So they get freed from the wall, they head south, they meet up with Kyle, and then those two bands band together. They travel to the Dolmens of Tien. I'm not sure why. I think Kyle just has a dream or something that he has to go there, so they go there. Eriko's upset because he sort of knows this is where he's supposed to go to die or something. He's the last of his kind, the last of the Thela Kai, the children of the earth, the sort of progenitors of the Thelamin, the Toblakai, the Trell, Barghast, all that. So they make it there. They find where they think Kaz is buried. They dig it up and they find a sort of a desiccated corpse, mummified corpse, and they're like, I think this is Kaz. Oh man, Kaz is dead. Whatever shall we do? And then Kalor shows up, and he's like, because he's all about vows, he's like, oh, I get this one last vow. I have to. It's implied that he vowed to kill off every last Thelakai, and so he kills Eriko, and Eriko lets him, saying like, yeah, I know this is my destiny. You can kill me. And he makes Traveler promise, don't interfere, but also don't seek revenge once I'm gone. Like, this is gonna happen. Just let it happen. So Kalor kills him, and then Kalor and Traveler sort of face each other up and end up dueling. And Kalor's overconfident because he's like, well, I'm Kalor. Who's going to be able to defeat me? And Traveler stabs him through the chest and says, that's not vengeance for Eriko, that's vengeance for another friend. And as a reference to Whiskey Jack being killed by Kalor in Memories of Ice. And then he whispers who he actually is to Kalor, who then freaks out and prays to the chained god to take him away. Or the chained one, the crippled god, because Kalor is I think Reaver of highest chains at this point. So anyway, so Kalor escapes, but Traveler definitely beat him. And then they meet up in the Shadow Realm. They meet up at the Shadow Throne in Cotillion, and at that point, Kyle's sword sort of comes back to life, and it's Osurk, and he's just like, "Hey guys," and Shadow Throne's like, "What are you doing? Get out of my realm!" And he's like, "Okay, but I'll give this special sword to Kyle because I was inside his other sword, and he doesn't have that anymore." So Kyle doesn't have the sword that is Osurk, but he has one of Ozurk's swords, which is kind of neat. I don't know if it's meant, but Kyle has Ozurk's sword. Traveler has Animander Rake's sword. So that was kind of cool that they're traveling together. And then eventually they go through using the Warren of Shadow and get to Quantelli, where this big conjoining, coalescence, combination. I don't think it starts with a C. Anyways, where everything's happening at the end of the book. So that's sort of their plot line. The plot line I don't understand, but that I thought was really cool, especially the first time I read it around, was all of the old guard. So we hear, especially in the Book of the Fallen, you hear about the old guard all the time, and they just like, they're mythical, legendary figures, and they sound so cool. And in this book, it's they all show up, and it's like, whoa, these legendary figures. But this time reading it around, I was really confused because they are showing up leading a rebellion against Lysine and against the Malazan Empire. So the Malazan Empire on Quantelli specifically is made up of all these disparate principalities and free cities that had been conquered by Kellanvid and were under imperial rule. But in this book, all of the Old Guard veterans sort of take military charge of these different places and sort of rebel against Lysine's rule. And the reasons for doing that, I don't understand, unless it's to punish Lysine, or they don't like Lysine, or they don't like how things are running. But all of these Old Guard who had seemingly died, I mean, I guess the joke is they drowned them. So they sort of faked their deaths and went into hiding for years and years. But for whatever reason, they all come out of hiding at this time to lead a rebellion against the Imperium. And the weird thing is, like, the what do they call it? Not Talion hegemony, the Talion League. Like, why are, if there are all these nobles and aristocrats and royal bloodlines that want to break free of Malazan rule, why would they accept as their military leaders the very people who conquered them to begin with, like Urko, Chos, Amaron? These are the people that had, on the side of the Imperium, conquered them, and now they're leading the rebellions against. I don't know. I don't know if it was explained well enough, or I just didn't pick up on it. But the whole time I'm like, why are they rebelling? And they lose. So like, it's like all these legendary figures: Tok the Elder, Chos, Amaron, Urko. They lose. Lysine and the sort of the new guard, the new generation of Malazan soldiers beats them. So, yeah. So there's a little plot line with this woman, Galel or something, whatever her name is, who is sort of heir to the Talion throne, and they use her as a puppet, and she's sort of our POV, our ignorant POV, our naive POV in that context. She's the one who doesn't really understand things, and we see things explained through her eyes. But she doesn't really do anything. She manages to escape in the end. Although there is a claw moss hunting her down in the epilogue, I think it is, or the last chapter. So she was there. She existed. Yeah, and a lot of these Old Guard end up dying. So they all come out of retirement for this. And by the end of this book, Chos is dead. Olin is dead. And Olin's an interesting one because Decimalt, or Traveler, says to Hood at the end of this book, like, Olin, if he would have lived, he could have won this battle. He could have went on to be one of the greatest military leaders in Malazan history. But anyway, so Olin, Chos is dead, Amaran's dead, Urko lives. Cartharin Crust, Urko's brother, lives. He sort of serves no purpose in this book other than maybe comedic relief, or as planting seeds for later books, because I know he's in a sale. But it is strange because Cartharin keeps showing up when we're like, oh, here's another Old Guard. What's he planning? How is he going to work with this rebellion? But no, he's just sort of there and then gone. Tuck the Elder, also killed by the Seti, whom he had brought into the Imperial fold and sort of was adopted by, but they kill him. We also have a Malik Rel. So this book is really hard for anyone who's read Deadhouse Gates. We have Malik Rel and Corbollo Dom. In this book, Corbollo Dom is the sword of the Empire, the leading military figure and champion, and he rubs it in everyone's face and mentions it all the time, and he is insufferable. The only consolation is at the end of this book, Malik Rel imprisons him. I don't know what becomes of him after this, but hopefully we never ever see him again. But we do see Malik Rel, of course. So Malik Rel, scheming, has somehow managed to come to leadership in the Empire. He basically runs the Empire at this point, in all but name. And he works with Vorkan from Drujistan's daughter, who was like a half-demon assassin and was trained by Vorkan, the master assassin of Drujistan. Works with her to kill Lasine. And at the very end of the book, Lasine is assassinated. And Malik Rel unanimously is sort of elected. Not elected, but like everyone throws their support behind him, and Malik Rel becomes the new emperor of the Malazan Empire, which it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth if you've read Deadhouse Gates. But then if you read No Life Forsaken, The God Is Not Willing, we have a bridge burner saying like, Malik Rel's a pretty good emperor, and we do kind of see that in this book. To be fair, Malik hates the Wiccans. Obviously, if you remember the Chain of Dogs, hates the Wiccans. But in this book, a character mentions to him like, you got to put aside your sort of your petty obsessions if you want actual power. If you actually want to rule and win, you have to sort of move beyond your hatred of the Wiccans. And I think he does move beyond this. And I guess the Malik Rel of he was also in Forge of the was it Forge of the High Mage? Most recent one, yes, a Forge of the High Mage. And Deadhouse Gates is not the Malik Rel of the God Is Not Willing. Anyways, we also have this mysterious character in the Imperial Warrens. So the Imperial Warrens have sort of been shut down in that anyone who goes into them doesn't return. And we find out there's this character who names himself Tatterdemalion, who seems to be a claw, who is in the Imperial Warren and is killing any claw that goes in. That's why no one uses it or can use it, because he just will murder anyone who's in there. Turns out that's Topper, former Clawmaster, who I guess went crazy at some point. I don't remember why or how, but he sort of abandoned his post. We had Pearl as Claw leader in is it House of Chains or Bone Hunters, until not Callum, Apsalar, I think, killed him. And now in this book we have Possum as the Pearl leader, the Claw leader, Claw Master, whatever. So Topper's sort of in the Warrens and doesn't do anything until the very end of the book, when I'll get to the end of the book. We also have Traveler, who is Decim Ultor, and Eriko. We also have the Malazan Loyalists and Li Hang, so that's pretty cool. It's kind of a small squad, and these rebels are trying to take Li Hang, and they almost do it, but through the work of this one squad, manages to hold down the city, and then are defending it as it's besieged by Tok the Elder and Chos. And they release Rylanderas, the White Jackal, the Man-Eater, brother of Trake, ascended, soul taken, diverse, we find out later. And in releasing Rylanderas, who had been imprisoned by Kellenvid, Rylanderas sort of breaks the siege by just utterly destroying Tok's and Chos's siege. And then at the end of the book, they managed to hunt down and, with the help of the Old Guard, managed to banish Rylanderas through some sort of portal. So I think Rylanderas isn't an issue now. Anyways, so about Soul Taken and Diverse, usually they transform, they're shapeshifters, they transform into some sort of animal or something. But with Rylanderas, it from the descriptions, it seemed to be he wasn't a man that transformed into a jackal. He transformed into some sort of half man, half jackal who was like walked on two legs, because they constantly describe his arms, not his forelegs, and how he rears 3 man heights above everyone else. So he seems to be some kind of weird chupacabra demon creature. Anyways, we also have Malazan loyalists, including one Nate, who were harbor guards in Unta. But after Unta gets besieged by or invaded by the Crimson Guard, and they invade Unta, the Crimson Guard too, and they think, oh, everyone's going to sort of be so glad that we're back. We're going to free them from Malazan rule. But they've been away for over a century, and people have gotten used to Imperial rule, and they don't want the Crimson Guard back. They see them as mercenaries and invaders. So the whole sort of city rises up and manages to push this small contingent of avowed Crimson Guard out of Unta. But in the sort of in the not battle, but in the mess and confusion, I think it's Carther and Cross who attempts to rob the Imperial arsenal, and he gets half of the Imperial arsenal out, and presumably has it on his ship, and we don't know what he's going to do with it. But the other half of the Imperial arsenal is exploded, and it gave me the Halifax explosion vibes, because I think they literally say in the book the largest man-made explosion or human-made explosion of all time or something. It like blows up half of Unta, which is insane. The Crimson Guard then go into Con and sack it. So that's like 2 major Imperial cities, including the capital, basically destroyed. And by the end of this book, the amount of soldiers that have been killed and people who have been killed, like, I think Quantali and the Empire is going to have very rough times for the next, like, generation. Like, it's going to take forever to recover. And maybe that's what Malazan does, and maybe that's part of the reason what makes him great is he's sort of the rebuilder, or at least, yeah, thinks he is. Anyways, so yes, sorry, these harbor guards, one of them's Nate. He's just like a private. He has no rank, but they gets conscripted into the Imperial force that is going to the battlefield where the big end of book battle takes place. And this Nate character really grows in the sort of second half of the book. He becomes sergeant. He meets Braventooth, and Braventooth gives him a name, calls him Jumpy, so he becomes Sergeant Jumpy, and he hates the name at first, obviously, but eventually comes around to it and embraces it, and becomes a really great sergeant, a sapper, of course, and basically saves the whole continent by the end of it. So that's pretty cool. I liked the Nate storyline. We also have these Malazan loyalists who are protecting Wiccans. So there's a pogrom going on over the Wiccans, and they're being assaulted and murdered and massacred by settlers on their territory. But this one Malazan, I don't know, battalion, division, contingent, whatever, team up with them and manage to help some children escape, or they save some children, keep them in this town that's then besieged, and then through the sacrifice of the elders, they're able to create a warren and escape. And just so happens one of these children is the reborn Coltane, which is incredible. Again, to anyone who's read Dead Who's Gay, seeing Coltane again is fantastic, even though he's a toddler. But everyone sort of recognizes who he is, and they defer to him. All the Wiccans do. And Nil and Nether show up and like find Coltane again, and there's like a joyous reunion. And then we have Nil and Nether and this Rillish guy, this Malazan, I think he's a captain. He sort of not betrays the Malazan Empire, but stops working for the Malazans and teams up with the Wiccans in order to help them gain their sovereignty and their independence from the Empire. And so they sort of besiege Unta, and someone, this is when Malazan finally accedes and goes to, instead of wanting to wipe them out, he agrees to parley and ask for their demands. And at the end of the book, the Malazan, or the Wiccans, travel through Warren. They travel literally through the abyss on horseback to get to the side of the battle, and with their one last cavalry charge, managed to scatter the forces of Skinner and the Crimson Guard, and sort of save the day. But again, we'll get to all what happens at the end of the book, at the end of this. I just want to get through all these. And then finally, we have a whole bunch of scenes at the Otadral mines on Otadral Island. And these are interesting. So there are a whole bunch of mages there on Otadral Island, ostensibly mining for Otadral. But it turns out that the veins have sort of all been played out, and so they've been there just as prisoners. All the mining that they've done hasn't produced anything, and they don't know it, but they're sort of there for no reason. But they're prisoners, so it still acts as a prison, and there's still enough Otadral dust around that none of them can access their warrens or use any magic. And they're also performing a secret research into the Jade Giants, because they find a Jade Giant buried in the Otadral sands. And so with them, these two new guys show up, and they don't give their true names, but it turns out they're Crimson Guard members. Blues is one of them, the sword master and mage of the Crimson Guard. So Blues eventually helps them all escape. They get onto a boat, and they can tell, like, something is happening in the west, in Quantelli, this, like, major battle. We need to be there. The Crimson Guard need to be there. So all the mages, they perform this ritual, basically giving all of their power to this one mage, who then uses it to transfer the entire ship through Warren to the center of the continent, which he does, and the ship crashes onto the battlefield. And then I'll get to what happens next. So that's sort of all of our storylines. So what we have is the sort of rebels under the Old Guard versus Lysine and her Imperials and the Loyalists. And they have a big battle, they have a big clash, and through a lot of grit and classic Malazan tactics and saboteurs and all the rest of it, Lysine wins the day. And she then incorporates all of the defeated people, including all the Old Guard, all the military leadership, into her own forces, and sort of coerces them all into working for her, because now there's a second battle. The Crimson Guard has returned, and there's going to be one final showdown to see if the Malazans will continue to rule Quantelli, or if, as Skinner and Cal would have it, they will rule Quantelli. So then we have that battle, and it's at that point that I don't think I mentioned this, but Kyle and the Lost Brothers, before they left the island where they were supposed to find Kaz, some old guy wandered up. It's like, "Oh, you're going to Quantelli, take me with you." And they're like, "Okay, fine." Turns out this guy is actually Kaz Devore. I don't know if he was the sort of mummy they found, and in opening his sort of tomb he resuscitated, but anyways. So Prince Kaz returns, and with his return he's like, "Hey, Skinner and Cowell are the ones who put me in that grave. Like, don't trust, they're disavowed. We're not dealing with them anymore." So Shimmer and all the loyalist Crimson Guard then sort of split off and go and join Kaz, and because of this, the only force left to defeat is Skinner and his sort of 40 strong Avowed, which is still a lot, because these guys are like near immortal. So they have a big battle. In this battle, Olin falls. This Commander Olin, I don't know his rank, but he was sort of like seen as one of these great military leaders, one of the Old Guard, but not quite that old. Anyways, and then the Wiccans come in and break up the last of Skinner's band. But because they're avowed, they're still getting up, and they're gonna somehow have to try and fight Skinner. And so Greymane, because Greymane's also in this book and with the Crimson Guard, he's like, "Oh, well, if Skinner's not with the Crimson Guard, now I can go fight Skinner." So he tries to 1v1 Skinner, and it doesn't go well for him, because Skinner is Skinner. And so there's only one person who's ever fought Skinner to a standstill, and that was, of course, Daesim Ultor. And who shows up but Traveler Daesim Ultor, he shows up and he puts a hand on Olin's shoulder, and this is sort of one of the scenes in the book, especially the first time I read it around, that just blew my mind. So we have not just Esslemont, but if you remember from Knight of Knives, two of his sword, his bodyguard of originally five, two had survived, Ferrule and Temper. And Temper was in the Knight of Knives and had eventually become the guardian of the Dead House. But I guess being a guardian doesn't mean he's stuck on Malaz Island, because when Slacine scraped together all she could to create this force to beat the rebels, Temper was one of the ones who got sort of sucked along with that. So Temper's there. Ferrule, who had been living among the Seti by the name of Wild Man, is also there, and he had heard that Temper was there, so we basically have a reunion of Temper and Ferrule, the last two remaining bodyguards of Esslemont, squaring off against Skinner, and they're determined to take him down. And then Esslemont himself shows up and says, oh, these two, they knew that I wouldn't let them face him alone. So we've got Esslemont fighting Skinner, dueling, while Ferrule and Temper watches back and sort of fend off all the other Avowed who are trying to get involved. And it's a great scene. And of course Esslemont wins eventually, but Skinner calls on the crippled god and gets pulled away and saved, along with the other Avowed that or disavowed that are with him. And then Esslemont leaves, and we think, oh, the day is saved. But then this ship comes crashing through the Warrens and lands in the battlefield, and the mage who had all these other mages grant him their power through this ritual, then uses the power to tear a rent in sort of reality and the realms in the midst of Quantelli. And it's referenced the sort of rent in I can't think of the name of the place, Southern Genabacus or Genabacus. It's similar to that, and it will sort of poison the whole continent and destroy it. So immediately the Shimmer's Crimson Guard and Kaz, the remaining Crimson Guard, sort of good guys Crimson Guard, have to team up with both the rebels and the Imperial Loyalists, who are already teamed up. So everyone has to team up, get together all the mages we can, and close down this rent. So they go ahead and they try to do that. Meanwhile, Nate, Sergeant Jumpy, collects as much Moranth munitions as he can, because they're like, if a big enough blast can, of course, shut it, because sure, if we have a massive explosion, it can save the day. So he's also trying to shut it. And then Taishran shows up as sort of what I thought was going to be a Deus Ex Machina, and I'm glad it wasn't, but I was like, oh, like this whole time, all these forces were like, will Taishran show up? Will he, won't he? Because there's not really any major mages on Lacine's side. So Taishran shows up and he's like, I don't want to be involved in any of your petty battles or any succession or any assassination attempts. I don't care. He's like, but if you're going to tear a magical rent in reality in the middle of my continent, that's enough. I'm getting involved. So he gets involved and starts fighting this mage battle, and we think, oh, well, Taishran's going to save the day. But then some of Cowell's Veils, his mage assassins, his sort of version of the Claw, show up and assault Taishran. So Taishran's trying to deal with two things at once, and eventually both the mage who had created the rent and Taishran get sort of sucked up into who knows where, and they're gone. Interestingly, Kiska from the first book appears a few times in this as Taishran's bodyguard. So she's a Claw in all but name. She's basically has a Claw training, but decided just to work as Taishran's bodyguard. So I thought that was really interesting. So like, we're introduced to Kiska, and sort of her character's built up so much in that book, and then in this book, it's not about her at all, but she's still in the world, and we see her from time to time. And I think that's really neat. That it's great world building where we build up this character, and then we don't have to follow this character's story book by book by book. We just know that they're out there doing things and living their life and growing and changing and whatever, and we can see them now and again, but we don't have to be focused on them. We can sort of be introduced to new characters, like in this book, like Sergeant Jumpy. We probably won't see him again, but we can know that he's still going to be in the world, and maybe he'll show up here or there and maybe if the authors need him at some point, they can bring him back, and I think that's really neat. But anyways, Kiska's there, and she's upset that she failed sort of Taishran. So then it's down to Sergeant Jumpy, and he manages to get all the munitions set, and the explosion goes off, and it destroys the rent and saves the day. And so yes, they're all happy, and if that wasn't enough, they're still like, great, we saved the day. Oh no, it's at this point that Possum, who's been sort of trying to protect Lacine, he kills one of this fellow Claw named Coil, because he comes upon Coil and she's killed a whole hand of Claw, and he's like, oh no, Coil must be working for Malak Rel, and she's going to try and assassinate Lacine. So he goes and kills Coil, only for it to be revealed that Coil was actually the High Mage who was actually a librarian, who somehow was also a Claw. I don't know, who is trying to protect, who had killed Malak Rel's loyal Claws and was trying to protect Lacine. So Possum's like, oh no, what have I done? So he goes back to Lacine, and it's at this point the one remaining avowed of the Crimson Guard that we haven't heard from, Cowl. I'm getting excited. Cowl shows up and tries to assassinate Lacine, because Cowl had once fought Dancer to a standstill, or Dancer's the only one who could beat him. Cowl's like a super powerful mage and assassin, so he's fighting Lacine. Possum shows up, or Possum's there and tries to fight, and this is when Topper pops out of the warren and is like, all right, Cowl, you and me, let's go. And they sort of zip off throughout the realms, dancing through warrens, fighting and fighting and fighting. They eventually end up on Malaz Island. Cowl's in the dead house yard, and he's like, I'm not going to let you defeat me, Topper. I'll remain undefeated, and like commits suicide by the Azath House, has the Azath House draw him into it and sort of bury him there for all eternity. And Topper's like, you idiot, what are you doing? Like, you're an immortal avowed. You're not going to die. You're going to remain there forever. And Cowl's like, ha ha ha, but you didn't beat me. Topper's like, I don't care, what? So that's the end of Cowl. But as soon as Topper and Cowl leave, Lacine's like, phew, okay, look, I saved the day, we beat everybody, everything's good. And that's when the assassin just appears and assassinates Lacine. And Possum's really shook up by this and sort of wanders off and sort of disappears. I don't know if we'll see Possum again or what happens to him, but that's sort of the final nail in the coffin for Lacine. And Malak Rel takes over as emperor, and he controls the Imperial Assembly, he controls the army, he controls the Claw. Yeah. So after all those exciting events, we're like, okay, we're finally done. But there's still one thing. Rylandris is still out there savaging the troops and killing hundreds of people, and it had ransacked a field hospital and killed hundreds of wounded. And so all the old guard are like, all right, that's it. We're dealing with this guy. So Urko, Amaron, Temp, Ferul, Rel, who is this Segula exile, who's like super, super powerful for a Segula. Anyways, they all go out and hunt down this Rylanderas, and then Liss, the city shaman. I don't like the word shamaness. She does her dawn dance or whatever and manages to create a portal that sucks both her and Rylandris into it, and presumably the day is saved. But of course, Amaron dies during this. And like I said, Chauce also dies. Ullin's dead. Talk the Elder's dead. But Urko lives, and I guess Urko goes off into hiding and continues to be like a amateur paleontologist after this, which is like really cool. I like that. That's sort of Urko's little character trait, is that he likes fossils. So yeah, so I think that sort of sums up the whole book. It is a huge book. I know this was a long video, but there's so much to it, and I enjoyed it. I loved seeing the old guard again. Like I said, they're mythical figures, but it was weird to me the second time around, being like, why are they doing what they're doing? And also, they suck. They lost. Like, I mean, there was at one point where Urko was on the back of Rylandris and had his arm wrapped around his throat and was like throttling him, which was pretty cool. And the scene with Daysum and the remainder of the sword fighting Skinner, that was really cool. And the reunion of Nil Nether and Coltane was just incredible. Yeah, but I think a lot of it was sort of sowing the seeds of the next few books in the series. And apparently, the next book is when they get good, according to general opinion. Anyways, so that was Return of the Crimson Guard, one mammoth of a book.